Dale Robinette, tell us about the Rockefeller habits.
Thank you. Appreciate it. So do you know that there's actually 23 million companies in the US, and yet less than 5% ever actually make it to $1 million in revenue? So let that sink in for a minute. How many of you are with companies that are over 500 million in revenue? How about 50 million? 10 million? And 5 million? What I'll tell you is that's rare air. If you look at the percentage, you're in the top 5% of all companies in the world. And the question is why is that? So Rockefeller goes back, well, that didn't translate very well. So Rockefeller, if you look at him, he was actually one of the first capitalists to ever really have just blow away the success of capitalism. And so a lot of people have actually studied him over the years. And there was a gentleman named Verne Harnish who was actually one of these people who studied him, and he wrote 2 books around it. One of them is called Mastering the Rockefeller Habits, which we're going to go through here today. And the other one is Scaling Up. It was his second book, which looks at how do we take these habits and actually execute on them? How do we make sure that people actually know how to do that? So what we're going to go through today is in your handouts, you should have something that resembles this. And you can certainly follow along, and you have some pens on the table to check off all of those areas in your business where you're doing really well, and then leave open those that you're not. And you can take this home with you today, and you can kind of review, where do you have holes in your organizations? Where do I need to actually improve? So there's actually 10 habits that Verne had identified as being kind of the best practices for these leading firms. What were the things that they've done so well that were the habits of the organization that separates them out? So we're going to go through all 10 very quickly here today. It'll be a little interactive, but if you can hold the questions until the end, if there's questions, just so I can get through the material. The first habit is, actually the first 2 habits, is around healthy team. As you can imagine, having a healthy team drives our businesses, and we're going to touch on that a few times throughout the presentation. And that really looks at, do your people understand their strengths and weaknesses of their peers, and do they accept them for them, or accept them for that? The second one is do you have a meeting cadence? Is there actually a cadence inside of your organization so that people can execute together and understand the direction that you're going? And then you look at education, and do you actually have a culture of learning? Are your people continuously learning? If it's all about people, what are we doing to invest in the people, and how important is that? And then the last one is how comfortable are people actually sharing their opinions, even if it's in conflict with yours, right? So if you have that kind of environment, you can possibly move forward. So if you look at your staff, so there's a question, which staff is the most destructive to your company? Is it low skills, no values? High values, low skills? High skills, no values? Or if we're all lucky, we get the high skills, high values person. Which one do you think is the most destructive to your company? So it's high skills, no values. And these people are toxic to your organization. And the question is what are you doing about that? So the second part of being a healthy team is, are your employees and is your company focused on the number one thing? So the point is that so many of us get caught up in all the tactical things that have to happen inside of our organization. But do we have one tactical thing, one thing that we're focused on, and are we driving it on a quarterly basis? Do we have a critical number tied to it? Do we have 3 to 5 priorities or rocks that are tied to that? And then are we actually deploying it with themes and celebrations to engage our employees in order to execute on this? And then the last one is are the employees even aware of it? Is it posted throughout your organization? Do they understand it? So are they focused on the number one thing, or are you looking for the next shiny object? So this is always the point, is we run into this on a regular basis. The leading companies tend to have smart actions driven against the top 3 to 5 priorities, driven to a quarterly number. So the coach and the players all know what the plan is, and they know what they're executing to on a short, defined basis, all leading towards the same goal for the company. If you look at the game Candy Crush, or any game for that matter, people are constantly fighting to move up the ranks of these games. And why is that? Because there's a finish line. They're all trying to move up and make it to the next level, and yet we don't see the same types of energy inside of our own organizations. Why aren't they fighting to move up our ranks? And so if you look at the difference between games or sports and our companies, there's one thing that's missing. And you kind of touched on it a minute ago with your goal line, and it's finish lines. We don't actually give them an end. We don't give them a goal. If you look at the sports teams and what they have scoreboards that are ginormous, right? They have these mobile devices with streaming content that are keeping people up to date on what's going on. Inside of our own organizations, we're lucky if we give them the score at the end of the year. So the point is gamify your business, keep your people engaged, make sure that they're actually having fun doing it, and tell them when they've won. And then, of course, celebrate it. Meeting rhythms, so is the third habit. And the idea here is nothing more than, do you have daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, annual meetings? And do you have a cadence in what those look like? The one that people tend to push back on is the daily huddle. I don't need more meetings, and I sure don't need them on a daily basis. The daily huddle is a best practice that we've seen in leading organizations, and so why do they do them? So the idea of the daily huddle is nothing more than it's a 10-minute meeting. A lot of them do them as a 10-minute stand-up. And you have your employees that are actually sharing what's their top priority that they're working on, where are they running into challenges, and then where do they need support. What most people who incorporate this into their practice tell me is that when they moved to this, the number of emails dropped in half. All of that type of information is being disseminated in a 10-minute succinct format. And people actually understand where they need to spend their energy. The fourth habit is around clear accountability and processes. And I'm going to spend a minute kind of going through these because this might be new to you. The idea here is you have functional accountability. And functional accountability is within each company you have specific functions inside your organization. Assigning one person to each function with a related KPI, key performance indicator, that they report out on to the organization. They're the ones that are keeping a pulse on what's going on for their part of the business. They're the ones that are calling in people when they actually need support to accomplish their goals, when they run into their challenges and their issues. The second one is financial statements. So this might be unique to a lot of you. The idea here is that if you look at all the major line items of your financial statement, who actually owns them? Is it the CFO? So the idea is that you would have one person assigned to each line item on your financial statement, and then having them again report out with a related KPI. What are they being held accountable to? Who's actually held accountable to it? And then how do we know when they're having issues? So there's got to be a cadence around that. So as an example, who do you think would be responsible for the financial statement of revenue? Who do you think would be responsible for revenue inside of your organization? Sales and marketing. How about cost of goods sold? Who might be responsible for that? COO, somebody like that, right? So the point is that within most of our organizations, we don't have somebody assigned to these areas, and then we don't know why we end up where we end up. The next one is around process accountability, and this might be unique to you, and the idea is that we all have processes inside of our organizations. Some of them are better than others. So it's assigning one person to each process inside of your organization. If you don't have somebody assigned to it, maybe you don't need it. And they report out again with a KPI that says, here's how we're performing. Companies that do this tend to perform much better than those that don't because they're improving their processes and all of and everything that goes on inside of their organization. Related to this is the next one, which is around employee feedback. Do people love or hate process? It depends, right? And how many times do you hear it's too bureaucratic, it's too challenging, oh my God, I can't get anything done around here. Well, who owns that? Somebody has to own it, right? And so how do we get that feedback from our employees? Do you have a feedback loop? Do you have your executives and your management actually having regular conversations with their employees, asking them, what would you like me to start doing? What would you like me to stop doing? And what would you like me to keep doing? So as you can imagine, if there were processes that were just driving them crazy, do you think they might bring that up? And so then who owns that and how do we fix those? Or our people leave for really 3 reasons. Their functional area is not really a fit for them. They can't stand the bureaucracy inside of your organization, or their manager's not listening to them. And so people quit people, and if you have these conversations, it definitely helps improve the level of people. If you look back 100 years, we're talking about investments today, there's been a pivot. A lot of us haven't even paid attention to it, but there's actually a pivot in the strategy, investment strategy for what we're looking at for businesses. 100 years ago, it was fixed assets fueled by cheap labor. Today, it's smart talent fueled by high productivity. It's a pivot. And if we're not paying attention to the talent piece of it, we're missing the boat. The 6th habit is around customer feedback. And the question here is are you having ongoing conversations with your customers at both the executive and the middle management level? And then do you have some kind of a feedback loop that says, hey, here's the pulse that we're hearing on the street. Here's what our customers are telling us, right? The 4Q is a series of questions that you would ask these customers on a regular basis. A lot of people aren't comfortable with going out and having these conversations. This was a feed in order to do that. And then how many of you in here are familiar with the Net Promoter Score? And how many of you use it? So the Net Promoter Score we find is an extremely important pulse on where you stand with your customers. And it's the simple question is no different than just to your customer, would you refer business to me? And it's a scale of 10 as a percentage, so that if they give you a 9 or 10, they are a promoter. If they give you a 0 through 6, they're a detractor. The idea is that you take the promoters minus the detractors as a percentage, and that's your number. You measure that against yourself, month over month, quarter over quarter, year over year, and you measure it against your peers. Are you doing better or worse? And then you measure it against what are the best in class, and what are they doing? A Nordstrom's, right? What are they doing so well, and how do we become more like that? The 7th habit is around values and purpose. And the question is are you actually living your values inside of your organization? Do you even know what they are? Do you have them? Are they posted? But more importantly, if we were to interview 10 of your employees, what would they say? Would they give us different values? Would they give us negative values? And the litmus test is, would you fire somebody for violating your values? And second, would you fire a significant client and take a financial hit for violating your values? If you can say yes to both of those are probably your core values. And if you can't, you got to rethink your values. The 8th habit for successful companies is around the strategy. And the question here is around the point of, do your employees, are they in alignment with your strategy? Do they even know what it is? Do they know what your big, hairy, audacious goal is, your BHAG? Followed by, do they know who your target customers are and what you're actually selling to them? And do they know how you're differentiating your products on the market? And the last one is could they just do a simple elevator pitch? And so if you look at the big, hairy, audacious goals, this was introduced to us by Jim Collins. And Jim basically said, it's a 20-year goal that has a 40 to 70% chance of actually happening. Which you may question, well, then why are we doing it? What it does is it gives the company the true north. It basically says, this is the direction that we're going. If they have decisions that need to be made, they know I'm either in the right direction or the wrong direction. You want your employees to know directionally where they're heading. What do you think President Kennedy's BHAG is, or was?
To land a man on the moon and return safely to Earth.
Quoted perfectly. That's exactly right. And do you think that when he first started or introduced that, do you think that he had a pretty high or a pretty low chance of that occurring? Pretty low. But yet, he put it out there, and sure enough, they achieved it in the time frame that he actually called out. It's the idea behind the BHAG. People will rally around an idea. They'll rally around a leader. The 9th habit is, how do you know and how do your employees know if they've had a good day or a good week? And the concept is that you're driven to 1 to 2 KPIs that are reported out weekly by the employees, which is tied to a critical number, which in turn is tied to 3 to 5 quarterly priorities or ROCs, and all of that is being held accountable by a coach. Do you have coaches for yourself? Do you have coaches for your organization? So that's where that is coming from. And the 10th and final one is around plans and performance. And the point is that, do you have a situation room where people can actually see how you're doing? Where they can actually see your core values, your purpose, your priorities, where they can look at a scoreboard and know whether or not you're on track for your KPIs or your critical numbers. This picture here is a picture of the mayor of Boston. This is his situation room. What I like about this is if you notice, there's actually just 4 screens. He's running a city with four screens. One of them in the top right looks to me like a live feed. Do you think a mayor might want to know what's going on in his local community and have a local news channel giving a live feed inside? But if you look at the other ones, they're traditional KPIs. He's tracking what's going on with my business, right? What's going on with how I'm driving my business. And so if you look at yourself or your key executives or even your employees, I think, one, this is pretty easy to do. And I think that the most anybody needs is to be tracking 4. So who's actually accountable for them? How do you know how you're doing? And do you have actually a situation room to make sure that you're occurring or that you're executing to that? So we talked earlier about the scaling up. Scaling up was the idea, again, from Vern Harnish, is how do we take these concepts now? Everybody's interested in them, but how do we apply them? How do we actually execute on them? So Vern wrote a book called Scaling Up, and we tackle, and I coach clients on how to scale up, and we tackle really 4 pillars, and we ask questions like this. So around scaling up people, it's, would you enthusiastically rehire everyone on your team? That was a quick answer and not that uncommon. The second one is scaling up strategy. And the question is do you have a sustainable strategy to drive top-line revenue? And then the third one is around execution, and it's, do you have flawless execution? Are you the chief executive officer, or are you the chief pothole officer? Where are you spending your time and energy, and are you providing the direction that they need in order to do the execution? And the last one is around scaling up cash. Do you actually have abundant cash to be able to fuel that growth that you want to do? And so these are the pillars that we look at within scaling up. And the comment is if you want to 10x your company, you have to 10x your people. And if you want to 10x the people, you have to 10x you. So the point is what are you going to change? What are you going to do different with this type of information? This list really changed the way I looked at business. They gave me the recipe. It's not often you get a recipe for business. And if you follow these practices, it'll certainly get you there. And what I'll tell you for myself is that You know, I've sat in your chair and I've gone through I don't know how many of these sessions. You walk out with a piece of paper in your hand. You may be very encouraged to do something with it, and then the day gets away, and you start getting caught up in your tactical day-to-day. So what I'll tell you is that if this is something that you're interested in, I will tell you that I'm obsessed with growth. So I'd love to have that conversation, one, because I just enjoy having that conversation, and two, I'd love to be able to work with you. So that's my story.